Hey guys, thank you for entering the chamber, and welcome to part 1 of my How to Play UniVersus series. If you are brand new to the game, this is the video for you. You want to make sure you stay right here and watch this whole thing start to finish. I'm going to cover what UniVersus is, your basic card types, how you set up for your first game, the basic kinds of abilities that are on all of the cards in UniVersus. Now before we begin, just a quick disclaimer for everybody, this is a video aimed at brand new players. Some of the information in here might not apply if you've been playing for a while, and I might fudge some of the details a little bit to make things easier for new players, even if that makes them a little less accurate. In short, this video won't help you become a judge, but it will help you become a UniVersus player. If you want the detailed rules, make sure you look at the description down below, and I'm going to include a link to the official rules reference that will cover everything about the game that you could ever want to know from a rules perspective. Let's kick this off by talking about what UniVersus actually is. Put simply, UniVersus is a collectible card game using fighting game inspired mechanics to pit characters from all kinds of media to see who would win in a bout between your favorite characters. Godzilla versus Spike Spiegel, Izuku Midoriya versus Faye Valentine, Yu Yu Hakusho versus Vaxalia. Anything is possible in the world of UniVersus. Now that we know what UniVersus is, let's cover the basic card types and then get into setting up for your first game. In UniVersus, there are 5 kinds of cards: characters, attacks, foundations, assets, and actions. Characters typically don't go actually into your deck, but rather they're something you select as part of deck construction, and then they're simply set aside and they represent who you're playing during the game. Attacks are the way that you damage your opponent, and typically they're the only way that you actually win the game. Foundations are the backbone of your deck, and they provide you with the various abilities that you'll use during attacks, and they allow you to play the other cards in your deck at the same time. They're very important. Assets provide you with very powerful abilities during the game, but they don't help you play other cards, so they're a little different than foundations. Finally, we have actions, which are cards we play directly from our hand as a way to surprise our opponent. They tend to be very complicated, so we actually have a section reserved for them near the end of the video. Most of this video is going to deal with attacks and foundations, as these are the core of every UniVersus deck, and they're the first kinds of cards you should learn and get familiar with as a new player. Most of this video will deal with attacks and foundations, as these are the core of every UniVersus deck, with pretty much no exception. With all of this out of the way, let's get into setting up for our first game. We're going to start by taking our character and placing him to the side. Then we're going to take our deck and set it over here. To start the game, draw cards equal to your character's hand size. As you can see here on the screen, Toya has a hand size of 7, so I will draw 7 cards. The player who goes first starts with their character committed, sideways like so, in a horizontal position. A card that is committed or in a horizontal position cannot use abilities and cannot be used to pay for other cards. It's effectively turned off. The player going first may take a full mulligan by taking all 7 cards, or however many cards they have depending on their character, putting them on the bottom of their deck, and drawing the same number, like so. The player going second will start with their character in a vertical position. This is called ready. A readied card can use all of its abilities and can be turned to the horizontal position to help pay for other cards. We'll talk more about that later. In addition, the player going second, instead of sending everything or nothing, they can do what's called a partial mulligan, where they can say, I want to keep these 4 cards and get rid of these 3. And they can put these 3 cards on the bottom of the deck, or whatever number they feel like, and they can draw that many more. Also note that at the beginning of their first turn, the player who goes second, and only on their first turn when going second, can take 1 additional card. This is true of any hand size. So I have a 7-hander, so if I was going second, I would get 8. If I had a 5-hander, I would get 6, so on and so forth. Regardless of if you're going first or second, if you perform a mulligan, make sure you shuffle after you send those cards to the bottom and draw your fresh cards. Now that we've talked about mulliganing and setting up for our first game, let's talk about how you actually play. In UniVersus, there are two zones where most cards go during the game: the card pool and the stage. The card pool tracks all of the cards that have been played on the current turn, and the stage tracks what cards have been played on previous turns. Note that your character is technically considered part of your stage. In the beginning of the game, the only card we will have in our stage is our character. Since we use the stage both to get abilities to use during the game and to play cards successfully, let's start by getting some cards put into our stage. To play a card, take it from your hand and place it into your card pool, like so. Because I'm using a training mat, you'll see that my mat has zones to place each of my individual cards. Just understand that this is a training aid, and these physical zones don't actually exist as a game mechanic. They're just there to help you learn. Now that I've placed a foundation into my card pool, I need to see if I've successfully played it. To do so, I do what's called making a check. To make a check, I first take the top card of my deck and put it into my discard pile, like so. Let's pull this out a little bit so you can see, actually. I then compare the orange number, called the difficulty, of the card I'm trying to play, to the blue number, called the control or control value, sometimes casually called just the check value, of the card that I put into my discard pile. If the blue number is the same or larger, I have successfully played the card. If it's smaller, I have failed to play the card and my turn ends, which is bad. Luckily for me, this blue 5 is bigger than this orange 3, so I have successfully played this card. This means that I have done what is called passing my check. Because I have passed my check, I'm allowed to continue to play other cards. Right now, this card called Blood Evaluation is going to stay in my card pool, but at the end of my turn, it will move from my card pool down into my stage. Let's play another foundation. You'll note that on this training mat, there are these pluses, starting with +0, then +1, 2, 3, so on. Before I make a check to play additional cards, I have to add what is called progressive difficulty to the card that I'm playing. In the game of UniVersus, every card we play gets a little harder for every other card that we've played on the turn, and that's actually marked on this training mat with these numbers. So you see here how we have a +1. This is because there's one other card in my card pool. So I take the orange 2, and I add 1 to it for a total of 3. So I need to get a 3 or better when I make my check. I got another 5, so I'm good. Next, I'm going to play this card. 1 + 2 is 3. I checked a 3. Close, but again, the same number as a success, so I'm okay. Let's keep going. I'm going to try to play this card that has a difficulty of 0, but I have to add 3 to it because there are 3 cards in my card pool. I'm going to make my check, and I got a 5. Now I'm going to try to play this card here called Fast Friendship. This has a difficulty of 1, and there are 4 other cards in my card pool. So I need to make a check against a difficulty of 5. I got a 5, so I'm okay. I could choose to play another card or end my turn. And for this, I'm going to choose to end my turn. At the end of my turn, all of the foundations that I played go down into my stage. They are now available for use on future turns. Trying to play too many cards on one turn is a skill that you're going to have to kind of get a feel for as you start learning how to play UniVersus, and it should be one of the first skills that you cultivate as a new player. Trying to play too many cards at once can cripple you and make you vulnerable on your opponent's turn. Note that when a card moves from your card pool into your stage, we call this building a card, or specifically we build these cards that we have played. If a card effect tells you to build a card, you will move it from whatever zone the effect tells you to, and then put it into your stage. For example, if a card effect said, build the top card of your discard pile, I would take the top card of my discard pile and put it into my stage, like so. And this card is now available for use, no check necessary. When I start my next turn, I ready all of my cards, and then I enter what is called the review step, where I may discard 1 card from my hand, and I'm going to do that now. The reason we might want to discard cards in our hand is that in this game, every turn you draw back up to your hand size. So you'll note that I played 5 cards and discarded 1, so I only have 1 card left. That means that I get a fresh hand of 6 more cards, for a total of 7, because my character has a hand size of 7. Unlike other games where you draw just 1 card per turn, in UniVersus you get your entire hand every round. Now that we know about foundations, and the 2 primary card zones in the game, being the card pool and the stage, let's take a little bit and talk about the different kinds of abilities that are in the game. How abilities are classified in UniVersus can get surprisingly complicated, but luckily today we only need to worry about the basics. All card abilities fit into 4 main types: forms, enhances, responses, and statics. Statics are abilities that are always active. Some statics will tell you what zones where they are active, but if they don't say, they're active anywhere, even inside of your deck. In addition, statics are the only kind of ability that don't actually turn off when your character is committed. Enhances are how you power up the attacks that you play, or power down the attacks that your opponent plays. They are by far the most common kind of ability, and they are probably the most important in UniVersus. Enhances are so integral to the game, in fact, that they're going to have a dedicated section a little later in this video. Responses are exactly what they sound like. Every response will tell you when you can use it, and when their timing is met, you can stop what's going on in the game and immediately perform whatever responsibility you have that's relevant. Each response will tell you when you can use it. Just remember that they happen instantly, and they pause whatever is currently going on in the game. Finally, we have forms, which are probably the most complicated kind of ability, and they tend to trip up newer players. Think of using a form ability kind of like playing a card on your own turn, except you don't usually have to make a check for it. We're going to give a couple examples around forms later in this video to help explain them further, so don't worry, by the end of this video, you're going to be a form expert. For the setup for this lesson, you'll see here that we're actually playing in a program called Tabletop Simulator. Tabletop is a very popular way to play online, and if you're new to the game, you should be at least passingly familiar with what it looks like in case you decide to play online. It's also very convenient for making setups, because we have here a mock setup between 2 players. We have a Toyo player and a Vash player. And I'm going to use this mock setup to walk through how playing attacks work and the attack process. Let's start by playing an attack. To do that, you perform the same action like you're playing a foundation. You take the card from your hand and put it into your card pool. You'll note that Icy Sword Execution, let's move that over a bit, has a difficulty of 5. So I'm going to make my check. Ooh, and I checked a 3. If you look at that blue number on the bottom right, I needed a 5, and I got a 3, so I've failed my check. I have 2 options here. First, I can just let the check fail and move this card to my discard pile and end my turn. That wouldn't be very good, so I'm going to go with my other option. Instead, I'm going to commit cards to my stage to pass the check. If you fail the check, you can choose to commit cards to make up the difference. For example, I needed a 5, and I got a 3, so I owe 2 cards. So I can commit any 2 cards. I could commit like this 3 difficulty and this 2 difficulty, or this 0 difficulty and this 1 difficulty. Either way, I have to commit just any 2. I don't get like a bonus for committing a more difficult card or a penalty for committing a less difficult one. Okay, now that I've passed my check, we enter probably the most important part of UniVersus, the enhance step. During the enhance step, both players can only use abilities from cards in their stage. Anything in your hand or any other game zone is typically off limits. If there's a card in your hand you want to use, you probably should have played it. In addition, the attacker, that is the person playing the attack, can also use any enhance abilities printed on the attack that they are currently playing. Players will go back and forth using enhances or choosing to pass and not use one. Whether that's because they don't have an enhance they can use or they simply don't wish to doesn't really matter. If you pass, your opponent gets another opportunity to take another enhance. Passing doesn't lock you out of using enhances later. You can wait until the opportune moment to use an enhance or ability that you have, depending on the situation. Sometimes taking your time is the better choice. Let's look at a really brief sample enhance step. I'm going to start by using the enhance on Icy Sword Execution. I'm going to name one foundation and commit all copies of that foundation. Looking at my opponent's stage, I see they have 2 copies of Unexpected Hero, so I'm going to call Unexpected Hero and commit both copies. Our sample Vash player is going to then pass. It'll then come back to me, and I will also pass. Now that both players have passed in a row, the enhance step ends and we go to the block step. Now that the enhance step is over, the defending player gets a chance to play a card from their hand to defend themselves against the attack. So to do that, I'm going to switch sides and take control over the Vash player for a little bit. And you'll see here that my cards have these shields in the top right corner. These shields tell you what kind of attacks the card is good at blocking. If you look, you'll see that the shield for Brutish Swagger is filled in at the top and it's colored like a dark red. That means it's a high block. If we look at Icy Sword Execution, you can see right here, and it should be highlighted on the screen for you, on the upper number, that this attack has a speed of 5 and it's a high attack. We can tell it's a high attack because the upper arrow is filled in. This means that a high block is the perfect card to use to try to block Icy Sword Execution. To play a block, we take the card we are blocking with and put it into our card pool, and then we make a check. However, we don't check against our card's difficulty. Instead, we check against the speed of our opponent's attack, which is that upper number on the right side, which is 5. Before we make our check, we also add the block modifier of our card to their speed. So Brutish Swagger, if you see here is circled, has a +2 block modifier. A speed of 5 and a +2 block modifier is a total of 7. So Vash is going to make a check against a difficulty of 7. He gets a 5, so I'm going to commit 2 cards, and I have passed my check. Because I used a high block against my opponent's high attack, I take no damage. I could have chosen to use Hardened Barrage, which has a mid block instead. Had I done so, it would have been considered only partially blocked, and I would take half damage rounded up. You flat cannot use a low block against a high attack, or a high block against the low attack. Let's switch back to Toya and play another attack to continue to see how a turn would probably actually go. We're going to do that right now, and I'm going to play this Falling Heel Strike. Strike has a difficulty of 4, but I have 1 card, so I need to make a check against a difficulty of 5. I got a 5, so my card is played. I get the first opportunity to take an enhance. In this case, there isn't an enhance that I want to use for this example, so I will pass. And it's going to go back to Vash, who can now take an enhance or pass, and he will also pass. Because both players have passed in a row, that ends the enhance step, and we go to blocks. Falling Heel Strike is a 2 high, so it's a 2 speed move, and it's a high attack. That's kind of how we would say that, it's just it's a 2 high. I am going to play my 2 mid block and try to partially block this attack. 2 speed with a +2 block modifier is 4, and I also have to pay for progressive difficulty. So 2 speed +2 mid block is 4. 1 other card in my card pool is 5. So Vash makes a check against a difficulty of 5. Ooh, and I got a 3. So in this case, Vash fails his block. We take the card and put it into our discard pile. And then Vash loses health equal to the damage of the attack being played, which is that second lower number that's circled right now. In this case, it's 4 on Falling Heel Strike. And he's going to go from 28 health to 24. Because Falling Heel Strike did damage, we're going to turn this card sideways to mark that it successfully hit Vash, and we're going to come back to that later for what we do at the end of the turn. I'm going to go back to Toya now real fast. As Toya, I could continue to play more attacks, or play some foundations, and I think I'm going to build some cards. So I'm going to play this on a 2 with 2 cards, so on a 4, it checks. A 1 with 3 other cards is on a 4, it checks. A 0 with 4 other cards is also on a 4. I got a 3, I'm going to commit 1 card to pass my check, and now I'm going to choose to end my turn. The foundations I played come down into my stage. Remember that this is called building. The attack that was fully blocked goes to my discard pile because it did not deal damage. And this falling heel strike that did deal damage, I get to choose between putting it in my discard pile or flipping it face down and moving it over here to my momentum, which is like a bonus zone where I can use this momentum later to pay for other abilities. We're going to cover momentum a bit more later in the video. Players will go back and forth taking their turns until one player's health reaches 0. When that happens, that player is eliminated and the other player wins the game. Before we move on, let's briefly recap how blocking works, because it tends to be very difficult for newer players. To recap, let's cover blocking one last time. We're going to look at the speed and zone of the attack. In this case, this is a 3-speed move, and it's a high attack. The defending player can then play a card from their hand that has a block with the same color or slightly off. If you look here, you'll see that this is a high block, and again, we have a high attack. So, the zones match, so we're all good. The defending player looks at the speed of the opponent's attack, which is 3, and then they add their block modifier, which in this case is +2, and they get a total of 5. They make a check against the difficulty of that number, and if they pass the check, they don't take damage. If your block is one step away, so a mid block for a high or low attack, or a high block or low block for a mid attack, etc., you take half damage rounded up if you successfully block, and the attack still deals damage, and we'll go to momentum. Now that we've covered all the basics of UniVersus, let's cover some other miscellaneous information that you should know for your first couple of games. If a player's deck has no cards in it, so for example, I play this card, I make my check, the game stops, I immediately shuffle my discard pile, and I take 10 cards, and I remove them from the game. They're gone forever. At this stage, the game then continues. If you are unable to remove 10 cards after shuffling your discard pile, you become exhausted and lose the game. Many abilities in UniVersus will have costs tied to them. We're going to cover some of those basic costs that you're going to encounter during your games today. Starting with commit. If a card says commit, it means you have to turn it from the vertical to horizontal position, or commit it, in order to use its ability. A card that says commit one foundation means you can commit any foundation in your stage. This can include the card itself. Just remember that when a card is committed, you can no longer use its abilities. Also, when paying costs, anything that requires you to commit one foundation as a cost, you can always choose to commit your character instead. Flip explicitly means to flip the card face down as a cost to use its ability. A face down card in your stage is still a foundation, and you can still commit it to pass checks, it just has no abilities or game text. Note that you cannot flip a face down card and make it face up. That explicitly requires an unflip effect. Destroy means to put the foundation into your discard pile, and destroy one foundation means to put any foundation from your stage into your discard pile. Again, this can include the card being that you're using the ability on. While we have it out, note that Quick Response also has a second enhance with the Deadlock keyword. Deadlock means that you can only use the enhance if your opponent has 11 or more foundations in their stage. Finally, remove costs require you to move the card from their stage into your remove from game pile as opposed to your discard pile. This is by no means an exhaustive list of all the different kinds of costs that you can encounter in UniVersus, but this is a good selection of most of the most common costs that you will encounter in your games. To recap, when attacks deal damage, we turn them sideways to mark that they have successfully dealt damage to the opponent. At the end of the turn, any attack that dealt damage can be put underneath your character face down as momentum. Think of them as meter or bars that you would get in something like Street Fighter or Marvel vs. Capcom. Some abilities and attacks require momentum to use. Think of it as unleashing a hyper combo in the middle of a game. They tend to be very powerful effects. When you first start playing, really focus simply on the basics of playing cards, making checks, and kind of learning the math. Dealing with momentum, you can probably wait until after a couple of games have been played. Let's talk a little bit more about assets. Assets, when you play them, go into your card pool like anything else, and you make a check the same way. At the end of the turn, I'm going to play some cards real fast. They build, just like foundations, into your stage. Oof, almost didn't pass that one. Note that note that assets can use their abilities while they're in your stage, but you cannot use them to pass a check. So, if you play an attack, and I check a 3, let's move that over so you guys can see. I can commit my character, I can commit a foundation. What I can't do is commit this asset to pass. That's the only downside to assets. Otherwise, they tend to have very powerful abilities. Also note that they don't count towards deadlock. Your opponent needs to have 11 or more foundations, not cards in their stage, in order to use deadlock abilities. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about forms, as these abilities tend to really confuse newer players. We're going to break this down nice and slow, so by the end, you're a form expert, I guarantee it. Forms actually come in a couple different shapes and sizes. Let's start with one you're already familiar with. Playing a card into your card pool. This is technically considered a form ability. Note that when you play a card as a form, just to play it normally, you make a check. But other form abilities don't require that. Some cards will actually have form abilities written onto them, and they behave a little differently. Let's take my promotional copy of Urameshi Perseverance as an example. First, I'm going to play this card. It has a difficulty of 2, 1 card behind, so I need a 3. It checks. For this example, I'm just going to end my turn and pull these cards down into my stage, like so. On my next turn, I'm going to draw my hand. And now, in addition to playing cards, I can also use cards with form abilities. Because Urameshi Perseverance requires a momentum, I'm just going to give myself a momentum real quick for this demonstration. So, I can, as a form, remove this card, put it in my remove from game pile, discard a momentum, and grab 1 card from my discard pile and put it into my hand. And then continue my turn. You'll note that now I have 8 cards in my hand. In fact, I can actually play a card, go through the enhance step, all that jazz. Sorry, I have to give myself a target. In the middle of playing cards on my turn, I can form, remove it, discard momentum, pick this card up, and then play it, even though I've already played a card. They fit perfectly in between your card plays. You can do it after playing all of your cards, before you play any cards, or in between any individual card play. Just remember that you can't use a form ability during an attack. Once an attack is played and we're in the enhanced step, this form ability cannot help me. I can't use it for anything, or any other form for that matter. Also note that you don't remove the card from your hand or use the form ability from your hand. It has to be played and put into your stage first, and then on a future turn, because you can't use forms or play cards like normal on your own turn or on your opponent's turn, you have to wait until it comes back to your turn, at which point you can use any form abilities on cards you have. My advice for you as a new player is to stay away from cards with forms until you're more comfortable, and then practice playing with a character that has a form ability. Toyo does not, but find a character that does that you like, and practice playing with that character and getting used to using the form on that character, and then you can look at using cards with form abilities on them and start putting them into your deck. Okay, last lesson. We're going to spend a little time and talk about action cards. These are these kind of tealish blue cards. Put simply, actions work the same way as other cards. You play the abilities on them the same way you would play other abilities at the right timings. But the difference is that actions can only be used when they're in your hand, actually. Let's look at an example situation and kind of walk through that. I have here a small training stage, which is a couple foundations, and a sample hand of 2 cards, and my 1 copy of Go for the Win. I'm going to start by playing my Icy Sword Execution, making my check. Ooh, and I got a 3, that's bad. I'm going to commit these cards. You know, we go through the enhanced step, all of that. The attack finishes, my opponent blocks it, let's say. Go for the Win has a form and a response on it. In between playing cards, I'm going to play Go for the Win as a form. When I play an action from my hand, I select what mode I'm playing it with if it has multiple abilities. In this case, I'm using the form. Note that unlike using form abilities from your stage, when you play an action as a form in this way, you must make a check. So, difficulty of 2, +1 progressive. I pass my check. Go for the Win's form says I destroy a foundation, and I build the top 2 cards of my deck face down. Then I remove the Go for the Win. I'm going to put it back in my hand because I'm going to use the other part of the action in a little bit. Now I'm going to play another card, this time on a 5. Again, difficulty of 4, +1 is 5. Ooh, and I check another 3, that's unfortunate. Luckily, I have these 2 face downs I can use to pass the check. Pulling Go for the Win back out. The response on it says that after my opponent passes, I can use this card and give my attack 2 speed. So, let's say, for example, I use Battle Aura Releases Enhance first. Flip, draw some card. What it is doesn't really matter. I then use the other Enhance, give this attack some damage. Again, doesn't matter. My opponent keeps passing. When they pass at that second time, I can respond, playing Go for the Win into my card pool again. Even though it's not in my stage, it's in my hand. The action's only cards that do that. I then make another check, 2 cards in my card pool, so I need a 4, and I got a 5. Response on this card says, after your rival passes an enhance, your attack gets 2 speed. So I would give Battle Aura Release 2 speed. Note that this is a response and not an enhance. So when it comes back to me, I can pass and end the enhance step. Because even though I played this response in the middle, we still passed our enhances back and forth. So the enhance step ends, which is kind of the advantage to Go for the Win. You can like sneak in some bonus speed. If I had an action with an enhance, it would work the same way. During an attack, I could play an action from my hand that has an enhance ability anytime that I could play an enhance. As a rule of thumb, you always make a check when playing an action. You can only use 1 ability on an action at a time. In other words, I can't use the responsibility, but then try to use this card as a form, or vice versa, even though it has a form and response. Think of them as 2 separate, like, unconnected abilities. Because of all this, actions tend to be very complicated, and again, for new players, I wouldn't recommend using actions for your first game, and rather waiting until you get a little more used to the rules. They're a great way to power up a competitive deck, though. Alright, we've covered a lot, but you are now equipped to start playing your first game of UniVersus. Everything in this video has been timestamped down below, so that way if you want to review a section, you can get to it without any difficulty. If this video made you excited to play UniVersus, make sure to let me know in the comments down below and consider subscribing. And if you're a newer player who still has a question that I didn't answer today, let me know in the comments and I'll get back to you. This is the first and biggest part of my guide on how to actually play UniVersus, so make sure you hit the bell to catch the next section, especially if you're a newer player. Until next time, thank you once again for entering the chamber, and I'll see you guys around. Bye now.